Hello, my name is Mike Davis-Marks and I'm the managing editor of theveteran.uk and a director of Veteran Force. Welcome to an exciting new podcast series called The Veteran Voice, featuring veterans talking about their military experiences and what they did after their service, and in particular, how their transferable skills transferred from what they learnt during the military into their new civilian roles. It promises to be an exciting listen. Roll on. So I'm here at Podcast Central to interview retired Brigadier Alan Richmond, late of the Queen's Dragoon Guards, whose last job was the Commander of Wales, or sometimes self-styled the King of Wales, and now is the Chief Operating Officer of Trinity Insurance Services Limited. Anyway, very delighted to have you here in the studio, Alan. Tell us a little bit about yourself for the listeners, please.
So I guess I came from a military family. So that might also head off your second question of what brought you to join the army. My father was in the army. Both grandfathers also served. One was professional, joined the army in 1910. My other grandfather was First World War, wartime service. And so I was sort of brought up in that military environment. And I think I recall my very first records, rather sadly. One was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and the other one was the World of Military Bands. And from my earliest recollection, I was sort of marching around the sofa. So I think I was always destined to join the army. We had quite a varied upbringing, because my father at one stage got posted to Iran, and we were there in the 70s for about 5 years. That was cut short by the revolution. So I had spent a lot of time back in the UK, boarding schools, etc. But at the very earliest opportunity, whilst at university, I ended up joining the reserves, and always had the intention of joining the regular army.
And what made you join the cavalry rather than the band service, given your early introduction to military music?
Well, that was purely accidental. I was always destined to join the infantry. I had a long relationship with one of the regiments. And then I went to Sandhurst on the reserve commissioning course, and there was a captain from the Queen's Dragoon Guards there. And anyway, he saw something in me and effectively wouldn't let me leave until I had signed some piece of paper. And a couple of weeks later, I was on my way to Germany to do a regimental visit. And I suppose, as I say, the rest is history.
The rest is history. And I understand you haven't really left QDG because you're now the regimental colonel. Is that correct?
That is correct. I took over in 2019, so I was still serving. And so my departure from the army has been quite a soft landing, because I still find myself in uniform from time to time, and very much involved in regimental aspects, including recruiting all the latest generation of young officers, which is a huge privilege.
And when one thinks of the cavalry, one thinks of horses. I know it's tanks now, but was horse riding part of your sort of skill set?
Absolutely not. I was very grateful for the internal combustion engine, and also the fact that my regiment had mechanized back in the 1930s. So horses did not feature large in my life. Although when I did arrive at the regiment, there was quite a cadre of people who were very into their polo. But I joined an organisation which was known as CROP, which was the complete rejection of polo. And so we watched it from the sidelines, but overtly sort of anti polo, but actually we really enjoyed it.
You filled in all the pivot holes.
Oh yeah, avidly. But we did manage to. I designed a flag, and we had a crop banner, and the fun was trying to get that on the 8-ton truck, which would then sort of pull the roller across the field to be exposed to all the VIPs and everything. So we had a lot of fun. But no, horses were not really in my blood.
So what would you describe would be the high point of your 32-year career?
Gosh, I mean, it's quite difficult. I mean, I suppose, the ultimate for me was as a commanding officer and commanding and being given the trust to command a battle group, a ground holding battle group in Helmand back in 2008, 2009, in a place called Garmsir. I suppose that was, the professional pinnacle, very much doing everything that you had really trained for and doing it for real, and commanding quite an eclectic mix of different cap badges and forging that into a team, and then in a very sort of difficult environment, trying to bring some real progress to the campaign, which I'm pleased to say we did, and indeed we were largely hailed as being the example of success in Helmand at that stage.
Excellent. And did you ever, in the weeks leading up to deployment, did you ever doubt yourself in terms of the task ahead of you? Or did military training, that all those years of military training, kick in and sort of give you the sort of the pathway to the success that you enjoyed?
I think I've always had some nervousness about every single job I ever did in the army. I think in a way, if you haven't got a little bit of that inner nervousness and are potentially a little bit too confident, maybe complacent, that's probably not a good place to be. Of course, the trick is to ensure that you don't show that overtly and outwardly. But no, of course, this was going to be the ultimate test. And indeed, I remember distinctly my very first day in command, having taken over at about 9 o'clock, and I had lost my first soldier killed in action within a couple of hours.
Gosh, that really brings it home, doesn't it?
It did, and of course it's how you react to that that sets the example to everybody else. And I think that was a moment when you dig deep, and I remember getting those that were available together and say, we've lost a brother soldier, but now is not the time for grieving. We've got a job to do, and we've got to ensure that he hasn't lost his life in vain. We need to deliver results.
It's a very sobering thought, and I'd love to dwell more into that, but I want to move on to the end of your army career. So you did 32 years regular service. You had 2 years in the reserves before. You're still kind of serving in your regimental colonel role now, but when did you start thinking about life on the other side? When did you start thinking about Civvy Street, and what were your first thoughts?
So I think it was when I handed over command of Wales, and that had always been an aspiration to have that command. I'd become very Welsh by inclination, maybe not by blood, but having served in a very proudly Welsh regiment, being exposed to Wales as a country, as a nation, as a tradition, I sort of achieved what I wanted to achieve, and I'd rather run out of things, that I really aspired to do. And so the day that I handed over was great timing, because it was the day that Wales had got its first confirmed COVID case.
Ooh.
So it was a good hospital pass to my successor, who, unfortunately for him, he just spent 2 years decontaminating Salisbury of Novichok. So for him, I think it was out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Well, at least he had some experience.
Yeah. So I returned home, and I'd been, largely weekly commuting, or the family would come and join me in Wales from Hampshire. So I came home, and it was almost straight into lockdown. And I think that was the opportunity to then start thinking, what's next? I have a young family, so I felt that I needed to find a long-term second career. So it was that stage that I felt, right, okay, there really isn't something that I will bust a gut to do. I had under my belt so many command tours, it was inevitable that the next job would be behind a desk. And I thought, no, I think I need to find my next calling. So I used the lockdown period to try and work out what it was that I wanted to do next. And I think my problem was that I had no idea. So I took on a coach to help me in that journey.
Okay, and what sort of tips did the coach give you that sort of set you on the path that you eventually ended up doing?
I think primarily at my sort of stage in life, when you're trying to reinvent yourself in your early 50s, the sort of traditional route that perhaps you're taught through the career transition partnership of, spending a lot of time on your CV answering advertisements for jobs is probably not the way to proceed. It's about networking. And so that's really how my coach helped me, was to, first of all, narrow my arcs down to 3 areas in which we were going to focus. And then, determining a plan of a series of networking calls. And actually it was a result of a very early one of those networking calls that I ended up really where I am now, although it did probably take about 9 months for that sort of process to play out. But so I'm very grateful to my coach for helping me on that transition.
So Trinity Insurance is not just the first; it's the only place that you've been to since leaving the army.
Yeah. I think I've only done. I've done two job interviews in my life.
I mean, one of the interesting things about transitioning forces is that people don't know where to go, and they often go to the first place that's offered, and is often not right. But you've obviously found the right place.
Yes, I think I'm one of those people that needs to be a calling. I mean, my military career was a calling. It was a cause. It was a noble cause, and so I needed to find something that was going to keep me motivated in the same way. Got me out of bed in the morning, because effectively there's something that really needed to be achieved. And so I connected with a lovely gentleman called Bill Cooney in San Antonio, Texas, on this particular call. He had been a US Air Force and retired as a brigadier general. He was a fighter pilot, Vietnam War era. I mean, he was in his late 80s at this stage. And when I said, Bill, I don't know what I want to do, and he was very sympathetic. He said, I was in the same boat. And he said it wasn't until I got a call from some Air Force friends in San Antonio, and I ended up joining a company called USAA, the United Services Automobile Association, that I found my second calling. And in that call, he outlined what USAA is. And USAA is a hugely successful US company that provides the full gamut of financial services to the armed forces community in America. And when I started thinking about that and comparing it to what we have in this country, I realized that here was something that needed to be addressed, that we have the armed forces community in the UK being very underserved by the whole financial services sector. And in many cases, our people have been disadvantaged, and this was something that needed to change. And it just so happened that Bill was on the board of Trinity, and Trinity was wanting to get into the veteran space. So it was a perfect alignment. And he said, well, I would be really keen to get you to lead on the new veterans proposition at Trinity. And so I bit his hand off.
So that led you to Trinity, albeit with a 9-month sort of acceleration lane to it, and you're now its chief operating officer. What skills do you think you acquired in your 32 years, or 34 if you include the reserves time, in the army that are standing you in good stead now?
I think what's important for people to understand, who might not be that familiar with the military, is that you fundamentally change jobs every 2 or 3 years. And so I think you become very adaptable, and you're used to being immersed in a very different situation and being able to then quickly get a handle on, where you can make a difference and how you can drive things forward in a very short order. So I think that adaptability is something that, very much held me in good stead from my military service. But I think also, you're dealing from, in my job today, you're dealing from the strategic to the tactical. And again, I think over my military career, I had the opportunity to do exactly that in various jobs. And I think that sort of prepared me well. And of course, it almost goes without saying, but, business is like military operations and service. It's a very personal thing. It's a people-to-people business. And so if you can get that way of working, with other humans, collaboratively and constructively, then I think you're halfway there.
Okay. Now, tell us a little about Trinity Insurance and how many of our listeners will be part of the Armed Forces community, so serving retired families. Tell us how Trinity Insurance serves them.
Right. So Trinity has been going for 25 years. It has been providing bespoke products to the serving military community for a quarter of a century, and I think it has developed a really good reputation for excellent service, and a very loyal bunch of customers who've stuck with it throughout their military service. But until recently, those customers have turned around and rung up our customer service centre and said, please cancel my policy because I'm leaving. And until recently, we hadn't had that full and developing suite of products to be able to retain them once they've left their military service. So the way that Trinity, and it's the first in the market to be doing it in the UK, the way that it is really serving the armed forces community is by championing their needs and meeting those needs for their whole life. And that's once they're in service, once they've transitioned out, maybe into a first career, but also into final retirement. So it's a sort of cradle to grave service. It's a veteran-led business. We instinctively understand the needs of our own community. And I think that places us uniquely within the marketplace.
Great. Well, we'll put some links to the business when this is recorded and published, so people can find out more from that. But I want to go back in time now and say, what would you say to a young Alan Richmond, sort of pre-army? What advice would you give to him now, that if you were talking to an 18-year-old Alan?
Well, so go for it in terms of their military service. I mean, what a fantastic career, amazing life I have had. And I would say to anybody that's contemplating it, just go for it, because you've no idea where it will take you. But I think if I had the opportunity to travel back in time and I could only say one thing to my younger self, I think I would say just ensure that you're looking after your own financial well-being, because you can really prepare for the future. And of course, the earlier you prepare for the future, the better. I spend a lot of time living for the moment, had a lot of fun, but I could have saved a little bit here and a little bit there. Got onto the property market much earlier, and I think those things, particularly in an era where some of the benefits, the financial benefits of military service, are probably not as good as they were in my day when you were based in Germany. A lot of the time, you had local overseas allowance. There was probably a little bit more cash around. And also, of course, the salary pension, full salary pension has gone, and now it's on a sort of career average. So I think people need to prepare even more for the future, and I think I could have done that better. And actually, it's something that I now find myself doing across the armed forces community, is acting as a champion for that financial well-being. Because I reflect on my service as a commander. I had a remit to look after the physical health and indeed increasingly the mental health of my people, but there was no onus as a commander to look after the financial health of our people. And I think we need to really prepare our people much better for the inevitable day when they're going to leave, and they're going to have to really sink or swim out in Civvy Street.
Yes, because not everybody does 32 years. Some people do 5 years or less.
Yeah.
So if you were giving advice to people contemplating leaving the armed forces now, whether it be a short career or a longer distinguished career like you had, what advice would you give to people on the verge of leaving?
I think some really need to do the maths, really do need to understand the benefits that they get in service, because I think a lot of people rather underestimate the value of some of the things that are slightly less tangible, maybe, in terms of the package that they get. So I think that's the first thing, and I think, and in a way I'm going to say this, aren't I? But you want to go to trusted providers because the marketplace is quite confusing. And having gone through that transition and leaving, I was struggling to find where I should go and which providers I could trust or who would understand my needs as a veteran. So I think they need to be looking for those providers that really do understand their needs, and hopefully also those providers that have bespoke products for them. Because I feel that there are still many iniquities, and I'm in the process at the moment of for Trinity to go and re-sign the military covenant, to demonstrate our commitment to the Armed Forces community. And when you read the Armed Forces Covenant, it's all about ensuring that people are treated fairly and they're not disadvantaged by their military service. And I think that actually we, in many cases, are disadvantaged by our military service, and particularly in the financial services sector. There are people who find it difficult to get credit. There are others who are perhaps paying much more than they should do for some of their insurance. And I use as an example, health. We went through all the agony of going through medical boards to get into the services. How is it that we pay the same as everybody else when we leave for things like health insurance, when actually we should be a better risk? So it's getting after those iniquities. So I think that for people who are leaving now, look for those providers that understand all of that, who are trying to address those iniquities and trying to look after your needs in a way that actually will turn armed forces people from being disadvantaged into advantaged.
Sounds like fantastic advice, if you don't mind me saying so. So, final question, and it sort of segues from the last, which is you're also on the board, the advisory board of the Veteran.uk, and more latterly on the board of Veteran Force. Tell us what inspired you to do that, to become a board advisor, and why you think those two particular campaigns are important.
So a couple of things. I think the Veteran.uk is, what a great platform. It is there to really champion to employers the value of veterans who are leaving and entering the workforce. And I think there's a lot of employers that do need to be educated about the skills and the value of veterans and what they can bring to their business. So I think that's the first thing. But I think also what the Veteran does so well is it, I think, gives veterans confidence in the skills and the experience that they've got and their worth in Civvy Street. So I think that in itself, to me, is priceless, and it is a growing community that I think bangs that drum fantastically well. In terms of Veteran Force, I've been, I guess, at that from the beginning in terms of how our thinking is evolving. But when I travel around and I see a lot of and meet a lot of veterans all around the country, I'm always struck that they're always doing so much. They're the ones who are keeping communities going. I was at New Year up in Northumberland and talking to a veteran who had also then been a prison officer. But it was him and another bunch of veterans who had been putting up all the Christmas lights and taking them down. And I think leading, showing a degree of example to other members of the community. I'm in the, just this weekend on Saturday, I've been leading on the planning of my village's 900th birthday anniversary, a major festival. And again, it just sort of shows that it tends to be veterans who've got that get up and go to take a little bit of leadership. And I think that what Veteran Force does is it provides a vehicle whereby these networks of small communities of veterans who are doing some good stuff can be connected into a larger movement that I think could do so much good for society as a whole. And I also, from my time commanding the army in Wales, where we were always almost the first place that the government, the Welsh government, would look to in terms of providing resilience. And of course, we saw that with the Olympics. Something goes wrong, they need a workforce that's disciplined. Who do they look to? It's the military. And, we live in, I think, rather disturbing geostrategic times at the moment. And I think if there really was a national emergency and the forces were deployed overseas, who do we look to provide that resilience across this country? And I think the obvious answer will be those people who used to serve in the military and have all those skills and experience. And so, therefore, I think creating some sort of network of veterans nationally can only be a good thing, if we are faced by some national crisis.
Personally, I find that very inspiring, but I would say that, wouldn't I? And that's a great note to end on. So Alan Richmond OBE, former retired brigadier, QDG, still the honorary colonel, and chief operating officer of Insurance. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.